Good morning to all those Broncos fans out there that want to get up early in the morning and check out Legends of Mile High, which is this show, this podcast. And I'm your host, Thomas Hall. And we are going to dive into a little bit of history because we've got to talk about the draft, right? And there's not much news happening surrounding the draft yet. I'm sure it's going to pick up in the next couple days. But this morning, we're going to chat a little bit about the third round and how the Broncos have kind of fared and who are the best third round picks that the Broncos have had in their history. So that'll be fun. And stick around to the end because I'm going to tell the Mile High legend about a fan favorite, Ed McCaffrey. If you got a chance to see him, you know what I'm talking about. He was definitely a fan favorite. So stick around till the end of this show for that. It'll be definitely fun, at least fun for me. So hopefully I can make it fun for you as well. And as we are getting started, let's check into the chat this morning, see who's here, and say good morning to the great folks that wanted to grab their coffee and join me this morning. So we've got Jeremy Sean coming in. Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, saying, morning, Thomas. Let's hope the third round brings us a couple of gems this year. Absolutely. The Broncos have to do well. They have to get kind of lucky, so to speak, I think, in the draft this time around. They don't have a first or second, so hopefully they can snag at least one really good, turns out to be one really good player, at least. It'd be nice to get two, but I can't wish too hard for that because it's a pretty tough task to find multiple impact players this late in the draft, but we'll see. They haven't had a great track record. They've had some real stinkers in the third round in their history. So hopefully the Peyton and Peyton combination will prove fruitful. Who else do we have in the chat this morning? We got Jesse Hilborn coming in saying, good morning, Thomas. Well, good morning to you too, Jesse. We've got Carol coming in this morning saying, good morning. Good morning to you, Carol. Saying, good morning, Broncos family. Yes, absolutely. It's funny that you say that. I mean, sports can really feel like a family. It's a family event many times, but people that we don't know that well, that we meet wearing a Broncos hat or talking, at a bar, you can really connect with people through your Broncos fandom. So it's pretty interesting that you said. So good morning to you, Carol. Thank you very much. We've got Dom coming in saying, good morning, Thomas, Scott, and Broncos country, Denver Broncos for life. It's great to see you here this morning, Dom. Appreciate you getting up. And hopefully you got some good coffee to keep you awake while we dive into these third round gems that we have had in the past for the Broncos. We got Jesse coming back in saying, my least favorite moment as a Bronco, watching McCaffrey's leg flop back and forth after he snapped it. First time I ever saw that. Gross. Yes. Yeah, I remember watching that. Yeah, it was that's part of the story that I'm going to be talking about later for sure. That was the Monday night before the infamous 9/11 bombing. Yeah, it was that was pretty rough. I've seen some pretty bad injuries. The Napoleon McCallum injury, the running back for the Raiders. If you really want to be grossed out, that's go look that up on YouTube. It's pretty nasty. So there's been some pretty gruesome injuries in the NFL, but yeah, it was sad to see because everybody loved Ed McCaffrey so much. And I remember watching that show, that Monday night game, and the announcers were kind of like, "Oh, he's injured, blah blah blah." But I saw it immediately. I saw his leg start to flop around, and it's it's never good to see anyone get injured, but injuries like that are hard to stomach. Dom's coming back saying, I listen to you every Friday at work. Well, thank you. That's awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's nice to know that you tune in every Friday because it is a little bit of a tough time to get up Friday morning and listen to the show. But I really appreciate everyone who does join and everyone who supports the show. So thank you so much for that. All right, so there have been some really, really good Broncos in history that have been drafted in the third round. Like I said before, there's been a lot of duds as well, but my favorite, the one that I think is the best. I'm going to start out with the best, is because let's not dwell on some of these others, and let's talk about the best one right out of the gate, and that's Billy Thompson. Bill Thompson was easily the best 3rd-round pick in my mind. I actually think he has a fairly solid case to talk about for the Hall of Fame, but, he doesn't get talked about that much. So, in my mind, Bill Thompson, number 1, easy. He was part of that Orange Crush defense, that incredible 1977 defense that's known as one of the best in the history of the NFL. And he kind of got overshadowed by a lot of those other players. I mean, Randy Gradishar, Louis Wright, some really good players on that team kind of overshadowed him. And plus, it was kind of that bad boy defensive line that got a lot of the headlines. But Bill Thompson, he that 1977 season, he had 20% of all the takeaways in that season, and that's pretty amazing, right? He accounted for 20% of the takeaways on that defense. Yeah, that's a pretty big number when you think about all the people that played for that defense. Louis Wright, and like I said, and Randy Gradishar, Tom Jackson. Some of those linebackers were pretty good at taking the ball away. So that's a pretty big feat. But also, he was an impact player, right? When he got his hands on the ball, he did something with it. He led the NFL in fumble return yardage. He had the second most career return yardage for fumble returns all time when he retired. And he wasn't pushed down the list until 1997. That's how many yards he had when he'd get his hands on the ball, especially picking up fumbles. And very opportunistic, very athletic, a great player. That it was just a gem they found in the 3rd round. So that's a pretty tough spot to knock down anyone else that came in the 3rd round. I like Justin Simmons too. I think another safety, Bill Thompson, in the mold of Bill Thompson, so to speak. Very good opportunistic takeaway. I think he ranks up there pretty high. Justin Simmons, right? His career's not over yet. We'll see how his career unfolds. But right now, he's one of the better safeties in the league. Has a couple second team All Pro awards. He's really been one of the best players on a poor team, and that's unfortunate since he's been here in the NFL with the Broncos. They pretty much have had a poor team, and it's a bummer that his talents have kind of gone to waste, struggling away. But yeah, he's one of the later picks, not really historical, so to speak, but yeah, he ranks pretty high on my list. So those are two safeties, and I think the Broncos have a great safety history. If you think about all the safeties that have come and gone, Bill Thompson, definitely Goose Gonsolin from the very, very early days, and then of course Atwater and Smith, and they just churned out these incredible safeties, and then a couple of them coming in from other teams like John Lynch and Brian Dawkins. I mean, it's just quite a legacy. I think one of the best positions that the Broncos have fielded consistently well. So that's another one. But one of my favorites of all time, and no one's ever going to talk about him as a best 3rd round pick, but I loved watching him when I was young, and that's Michael Brooks. Michael Brooks is never going to be on the list of the greatest Broncos of all time, or probably not even on the list of the third best 3rd rounder, but he's one of my favorites. He's a tackling machine back in the days when inside linebackers were incredible, right? You won't find a consecutive 4-year stretch in Broncos history outside of Randy Gradishar, of course, that had more tackles than Michael Brooks. Incredibly instinctive player, and he fell to the 3rd round because he was injured. He got injured. He was probably going to be a 1st round pick, but got injured. It took him a while to heal up from that, but once he healed up, he was back to his former self, and an incredibly instinctive player. And then, of course, he left in free agency, followed Dan Reeves to the New York Giants, had one of his best years that following year in the NFL. But yeah, he's one of my favorites just because I love middle linebackers. I said that many, many times. So it's one of those nostalgic positions for me. And Michael Brooks, nobody knows him, but he's one of my favorites. Now we got Jesse Hilborn coming in saying, I really feel the most important 3rd round pick we have ever had is Jason Elam. record distance, but more important was the number one scoring player in Broncos history. Yeah, he is definitely on the list. It's hard to argue against Jason Elam. He's one of the greatest third rounders selected. I like to give Bill Thompson the nod, but it's if you're a Elam guy, it's pretty tough to go against Elam. Incredibly important player for the Broncos for those Super Bowls. Yeah, definitely breaking the record for the longest field goal, which was incredible. But he was just so clutch. He was just clutch all the time. Even as he got older, he was still a clutch kicker and very important. And I remember, the Toro play call where they ran out with the time ticking down and he booted in a field goal without getting a timeout because they didn't have one and everything. So yeah, Jason Elam is definitely ranks high. And if anyone puts them above Bill Thompson, I'm not going to argue with it because he is, he's got a case for the Hall of Fame too, really. And the problem is special teamers typically get overlooked, especially kickers and punters. There's very few that are in the NFL or the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So it's interesting that he'll probably never get in, but he has an interesting case for sure. And yeah, it's Jeremy's saying it's crazy drafting a kicker in the 3rd round, right? Yeah, it is. You don't usually have that, but you're right. He was a steal. He was a wildly important player in the Broncos' history and those Super Bowl victories. So, yeah, Jason Elam is ranks high. And then another one who bounced around the league but came back to the Broncos when and help them solidify their defensive line and get them over the hump on that defensive line. That's Keith Traylor, right? He's a 3rd rounder. He was drafted as a linebacker back then. He played inside linebacker. Dan Reeves brought him in as an inside linebacker in the 3rd round, and he left and he played a little of, I think it was NFL Europe or World Football League. I don't remember what it was called at the time. Looked like he wasn't going to make it and basically bulked up to play defensive tackle. And he did bulk up. He went from 260 to over 300 pounds. And then, was a key cog in actually 3 championships. He won one in New England, I believe, as well. So, yeah, he didn't lose his athleticism, even though he put on that much weight, right? He was still athletic. He has two really incredible interception returns. With the Broncos, he did it for a touchdown, but the one they always show is when he did in Chicago, which ended up not being a touchdown, but they're both like 60-yard interception returns. It was very athletic, so it's cool. Good morning, Isaiah Stacks coming in. Thank you for being here this morning, saying good morning, Broncos country. Well, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, where we talk a lot about history and a little bit about current events, try to blend them together and make it fun for everybody on a Friday morning. I hope everyone has got a good cup of coffee. And as we discuss the draft coming up, and like Jeremy said, the Broncos really need to get an impact player. They need to luck into it. And I'm saying luck. And I don't want to say that it's all luck, but the numbers show that it's hard. The probability of selecting an impact player in the 3rd round is extremely difficult. They put a lot of work into it. They definitely put these players through so many different analyses and interviews and everything, trying to figure out. And these are the best of the best, right? The NFL scouts, the best of the best, and they still are only hitting on a very small percentage. So a little luck is involved, and hopefully the combination of Sean Payton and George Payton can make some really good hay, like he did with Mickey Loomis with the Saints in New Orleans. So that'll be interesting. But I've got to hope that they bring in a center who is actually really good, right? I mean, Cushenberry has not been that good, so hopefully they can find a talented center in the 3rd round. That's my pick. But I'm who knows how the board's going to fall. But hopefully the center position is one that they pick up. Now, Here's a name that many people probably wouldn't think was a great 3rd-round pick, but he actually was a pretty solid player and had one incredibly good season at quarterback, and that's Brian Griese. Now, I know that Brian Griese is the reason, well, partially the reason Terrell Davis was lost to injury. So it's hard for Broncos fans to think about Brian Griese as a good 3rd-round pick. He threw that interception, fateful interception that Terrell Davis made the tackle on and got hit in the knee, and that was pretty much the end of his career, blowing out his ACL. But Brian Griese actually was a fairly solid quarterback, not great. He was one of those quarterbacks that were good enough to, keep you competitive, but not great enough to take you over the top. But he had one of the best seasons, really, of a Broncos quarterback, outside of Elway and Peyton Manning. So he had a really good season in 2001, and if you adjust it for era, and compare it, he's comparable to some of the better seasons. Now, it was only one, obviously, and then he went to the Bears, and he didn't have an incredible career, but he was still pretty solid Bronco. And everybody was expecting Bubby Brister to take over when Elway retired, and Griese just flat out beat him out in preseason, and that was the end of Bubby Brister's really career in Denver. So it was a big surprise, but yeah, it was a solid pick, one that you probably don't expect me to come up with, but Jesse Hilborn's coming back in to collaborate with me on the luck, saying it's very much luck. One has to make it there first. 66 possibly better players going before. Pray a better falls. Yeah, absolutely. It is. It is. I mean, I hate to say luck, but if you look at the numbers, it really is. I mean, you have better luck rolling dice than you do picking an impact player in the NFL draft, but you still have to put all your work in. You can't just go out there and wing it. So, and then we got Jeremy coming back in talking about Brian Griese. The problem was throwing Griese in before he was ready because Shanny was fed up with Bubby. One of the fatal mistakes. Griese was good in 2000. Yeah, 2000. Yeah, not 2001. But yeah, it's true. I think you might have said this a long time ago, or it was somebody on the show was talking. We got into discussion about Bubby just kind of, not really putting in a lot of effort, just thought it was his job, and wasn't really there to put in all the work. And Brian Griese was, and you're right. I mean, he just flat out beat him in the preseason, and Shan had to make that choice, right? And people were calling for Bubby Brister to be the starting quarterback when John Elway was hurt in 1998. That's how, they thought he was going to be the next great Broncos quarterback, and it never came to fruition, of course. And he was the backup for Brian Griese, and then he was off the team. So he wasn't. I don't think he was active for most of the season that next in that 1999 season, which was a terrible season. Ended up being bad all around. It was quite a drop after back-to-back championships, but you lose your MVP and you lose your starting quarterback. That kind of stuff will happen. So now we've got Mark Hoynek coming in with a great name, Steve Sewell. Steve Sewell should be named greatest third down back Denver ever had. So many clutch plays. Yeah, I've said that before. There's a few players that played for the Broncos that I said if they played in today's game, they'd be great players, right? So Rulon Jones is one that I think if he was playing in today's game, he's probably a Hall of Famer. Steve Sewell is another one that I think would be a much better player playing in today's game because his ability, he wasn't a great rusher. I mean, in fact, I think he only has 917 career rushing yards, if I remember correctly, for the Broncos. But you're right. He was an incredible receiver out of the backfield and the drive. If it wasn't for Steve Sewell, the drive probably wouldn't have happened. He accounted for a majority, maybe not a majority. He accounted probably 40%, 30 to 40% of those yards in that 98-yard drive, right? And clutch performer. I loved Steve Sewell back in the day. He just wasn't the running back as far as rushing that Dan Reeves was really looking for. He was hoping Steve Sewell would pan out, but he never did. But yeah, if he was in today's game catching passes out of the backfield, dynamic player, yeah, it would have been awesome. So we've got Isaiah's coming back in, saying, "In Peyton we trust. He's found good players in the 3rd round and after." You're right. I think Peyton, George Peyton, has got kind of a knock so far on his record for this last draft, but I actually think it was a very solid draft. I mean, there wasn't a lot of really contributors right away, but there's going to be, right? The 4th round cornerback Demary Mathis is going to be a starter this year. He was a starter at the end of the year out of necessity, but he really came into his own at the end of the year. Towards the end of the year, he's penciled in as the starter. I think people are knocking the draft because Bonita didn't really work out, but that he was a project and everybody knew it. So then you've got it was Arike. I think I've said that right. And you got Henningsen, 6th rounder, 4th rounder that came in and played a little bit, and they're going to be, they haven't gone out and got an experienced depth player, so they're going to be leaning on those two as well. And then you've got DeLaren Turner-Yell, who's going to be a backup safety. This draft is kind of one of those. These guys are going to step up out of necessity, and people are going to look back on it and say it was a pretty good draft if they do step up. So I think they had a solid draft both seasons. And then Albert Knoppers is coming in saying, "Good morning, Thomas and everyone," and then saying Dulcich is great. Yeah, that's a great pick too, 3rd-round pick. Hopefully he can stay healthy. I think he's going to be a dynamic tight end. I think it's going to be I think it's going to come back. People are going to look back in a couple of years and say that was a pretty solid draft, maybe even better than his first draft, because I liked his first draft, but the problem is the injuries have taken its toll on that draft. Javonte Williams is injured. Baron Browning has suffered, struggled with injuries. So who knows how it's going to pan out, but let's come back and talk about it in another 2 years. And then we can really kind of evaluate that draft. But you're right. Isaiah, I think the combination of George Payton and Sean Payton is going to pay dividends, because if you look at Sean Payton's track record in New Orleans, he found several gems later in those drafts, 3rd rounds, 7th round. I mean, Zach Strief, who's now the offensive line coach for the Broncos, was found late in the draft, 7th rounder, I believe. And that's he was a solid player for them for a long time, but he found several offensive linemen, other players late in the draft. He's got a knack for it, and I think the combination of these two will be good. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, and we'll find out. But I hope that this combination of these two Paytons pays dividends. Keith Brugman coming in from Facebook saying he won't get as much hype not being a skill position player, but Elam was a great 3rd rounder. Absolutely. Yeah, we talked about Elam early on. Somebody else said Jason Elam. And yeah, he is probably the number 2 in my book. But if someone puts up number 1, I'm not going to argue. I still think Bill Thompson is just so overlooked, so underrated as the player he was, that I put him first. But yeah, Elam, you can't argue with the picking of Jason Elam. I mean, he was a clutch kicker and definitely Hall of Fame worthy. Tim Durr coming in from Facebook. Thank you for being here this morning, saying, "Morning, Thomas. What's good, Broncos country?" Well, what's really good is the NFL draft is coming up, right? And I know that I said this before. I get excited about the NFL draft. I always have. And the NFL does such a great job with the draft, right? There's no other draft that happens. Basketball, they've tried to make that exciting. They got the lottery pick and they're trying, but nothing compares to the NFL draft when it comes to picking players for the future of the team. And there's so much that goes into it. So many people, do their evaluations. They do they put their mock drafts out. It's incredible. And the mock draft machines have just made it even made it even more fun for people. These mock draft simulators, they can pretend like they're the GMs and they're picking it. It's incredible. I love it. It's coming up in just a couple weeks, and this show will be the day of the Broncos picking, really that morning. So we'll have a little preview for you that morning, unless they trade up into the first or second round. So, if they trade up, that first round, they might be able to pick in Thursday. But yeah, I'll be previewing a little bit of the draft that day. Jesse Hilborn's coming in. Thomas, when are you going to do a show on the Gremlin? Tyrone Braxton was one of my favorite Broncos growing up. I've talked about Tyrone Braxton several times on the show. I should do a show of the most underrated Broncos of all time, because he would be on the list. He was an incredible ball hawk. Man, I love Tyrone Braxton. Nobody really talks about him as being one of the keys in that Super Bowl champion, the back-to-back championships, but he really was. Ball hawk, started out as a cornerback, moved to safety, and really, played well late into his career. And I know that there's that picture of him barely missed deflecting that ball that the far through to the tight end there in the Super Bowl. But incredible player, incredibly underrated. Like I said, one of those players on that long list of great safeties. And I know he came out of college as a cornerback and played cornerback in the league for a while, left for a year and then came back. And yeah, it was great. I love Tyrone Braxton. I really do. He was a champion, man. He won so many championships at NDSU, and then coming in here and with the Broncos and winning. So yeah, it's Tyrone Braxton, a great player. We'll have to do a show where the most underrated Broncos of all time, if people are interested in that. We got some good names thrown out there. Draymond Jones is a good third-round pick. That was Isaiah saying that. I think I like Draymond Jones. Obviously, he left, and so it's gonna, and he's speaking out about how he should have been gone before, which is, leaves a bad taste in people's mouth. I wish he would have stayed. He was on the cusp of doing something really good, I think, and he's going to do it for another team. But yeah, a solid pickup. Definitely, if he'd have stuck around with the Broncos, maybe in 10 years, we'd be talking about how he is one of the best third-round picks of all time. But he's a Seattle Seahawk now, and so I'm not going to like him. So I'm sorry. I don't like other teams, and I don't like other teams' players. So even if they were from the Broncos, I mean, I kind of say that tongue in cheek, but whatever. Hey, we got Tim Durr coming back. This draft is meh, especially this year without a pick in the first or second round. It really is, Tim. It is kind of a bummer. There's nothing, that the excitement comes in the first round, right? And it is kind of one of those blah drafts because the Broncos aren't picking early, but you never know what's going to happen, right? You never know. Sean Payton has a history of wanting to trade up in the draft. I know there's not much draft capital to do it. You may see some fireworks, you may not, but that's the thing. It's the waiting around to see what your team is going to do. And then they do something and it's either good or bad. And you talk about it. And then, 3 years later, you find out if it was good or not. So it's one of those things that it's fun to watch and there's a lot of excitement and who knows what's going to happen. And then everybody grades the picks and nobody really knows how good it was for 3 years. And then everybody forgets about what their grades were, but it's still fun. All right, so let's talk about Jeremy Shawn's pick. Eric Decker was a pretty good third rounder as well. Yeah, Eric Decker was, that combination of him and DT was pretty solid. I like Eric Decker. I think he was okay. He's definitely in that list. I just the one that him sliding in that game just really kind of put a bad taste in my mouth, going sliding feet first instead of trying to get more yards. I know that's a little bit nitpicky, but it kind of pushed him down the list for me. But yeah, he's definitely a great, he was part of that explosive offense that was incredible. The best offense in the ever in the NFL. So can't knock it. But the thing about it, when you think about Eric Decker with the Broncos, if you look at the career yardage for receivers for the Broncos, he's barely above Ashley Lilly, which, if you think about that, that's that's a kind of an interesting thing to think about. You put Eric Decker up here, like, oh yeah, it was great, but then you say Ashley Lee was a bust, but yet they're pretty similar in receiving yardage. I mean, he scored more touchdowns, but he also had Peyton Manning throwing to him, so that definitely helped. Keith Brugman's coming in to talk a little bit about the supplemental draft. I don't know if it's still around. I think it is, but yeah, the Broncos have only used it 4 times in their history. Supplemental draft. One for Bobby Humphrey, first round. They used the supplemental draft first round pick for Bobby Humphrey, and then in '84, I think they used 3 picks. But yeah, the supplemental draft. It's interesting. I don't know if it. I think they still have a supplemental draft, but it's nothing. They don't really talk about it much, if at all. And so I'll have to research that and see if they still do it. But yeah, Maurice Clarett, that was that was a hopeful pick that ended up being a bust, unfortunately. But yeah, I think he could have been a really good player in Shanahan's running system if he had been able to pan out and was actually, able to work and do what he needed to do to make the team, but he obviously didn't. So it's that's one of those picks that go down as a bust, but what could have been, he could have been a really good player in that system, just like many of the other running backs that came through, but better than the Alandis Garys or the Reuben Drones, but he didn't pan out. And Tim Durr's saying it may not be a popular opinion, but he wasn't that high on Decker. I feel like he was more interested in getting pass interference than catching the ball. Yeah, I think you're right, Tim. Like there are people that love Eric Decker and people that don't really think he was that great. I'm one of those as well, right? He has a place in the history, but there were a few things that I didn't care for about Eric Decker when he played for the Broncos, and he got shipped out, and Emmanuel Sanders came in, and he was one of the catalysts to get them over the hump. I think Emmanuel Sanders' career with the Broncos is vastly underrated. I think he was a key in those championship run. So yeah, thank you for that. All right. We're 7:32. So let's wind this down. I'm going to do the Mile High Legend now. So like I said, we're going to talk about Ed McCaffrey. I'm not sure what we're going to do next week, but I'm going to keep bringing these little stories back. So let me know if you enjoy them. I think it's fun to research all of these players to kind of bring some of that to you today. So let's start off. Well, let's just I'm just going to say I'll see you next week. I'm going to end the show after this Mile High Legend, but yeah, join me next week. It's the first day of the Broncos draft. If they don't trade up, we'll do a little bit of a preview that morning and jump right into it. So, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Thomas Hull NFL. I've also got a couple other shows, Mile High Insiders with Luke Patterson. So don't miss that. That's Wednesday night. That's a preview before the draft, really right before the draft, which will be fun. And then, the Orange and Blue View on Saturday, we can talk about some of the draft picks that were made. So that will be fun as well. So don't miss out. Join on those shows as well. But let's jump into the Mile High Legend. So according to football experts, Ed McCaffrey wasn't supposed to amount to anything in the NFL. Yet he became one of the greatest receivers really in Broncos history and a fan favorite. And any Broncos fans that got to see him play knew he was tough as nails wide receiver. And he took plenty of punishment game in and game out and kept making catch after catch. And yet those early reports of him coming out of college would make us believe he wasn't that type of player. And his path to becoming a Broncos legend really was filled with challenges. And it was really fueled by those perceptions of him that as a player, even though he wasn't embodied that perception, but that was definitely played a part in him struggling to land somewhere. But those ill-conceived conceptions made his desire to make it on the gridiron and drove him to success, right? But it led to some very interesting rituals in order to be better, right? McCaffrey was obsessed with getting faster. And to do that, he had to get lighter. So he would alter his equipment to do that. And he would cut away parts of his equipment, including his jock strap, the top band of his jock strap, he would cut off. Anything he could do to make himself lighter. And that's dedication, right? To do all that. He wore a pair of shoes that were a size too small, and he cut a hole out so his big toe could stick out so he wouldn't be uncomfortable wearing too small of shoes. And he wore a pair of shoulder pads that hadn't been produced in years. In fact, you couldn't even find those on high school teams, but he carried them around. Even he wouldn't be able to wear them today, I'm sure, but some shoulder pads that gave little protection. And that's the problem. For the sake of, being better on the field, he would remove all this equipment, but that downside was he absorbed a lot of punishment and took a lot of pain versus other people at the same position. But it did take time for McCaffrey to really develop into a receiver that we think of fondly today. He played sparingly for the New York Giants, and then he played a single season for the 49ers and didn't play that much. But he did win a championship with the 49ers, and then he followed Mike Shanahan to Denver in 1995, and that's when his career really took off. And he was a key cog in those back-to-back championships, and his tough-as-nails approach to the game was really an inspiration. And he had 3 1,000-yard seasons, and his blocking ability was second to none, right? And that was a key in the Broncos offense, is having receivers who could block in the running game. And Shanahan actually described him as one of the best blocking receivers of all time. And if you watch that Super Bowl against the Green Bay Packers, everybody saw him just blast that linebacker for the Green Bay Packers, which, allowed Howard Griffith to run for 23 yards and set up the game-winning touchdown. Just laid him flat out on his back. And McCaffrey's value was really incredible in blocking and receiving. And even the former Broncos coach, Dan Reeves, said that one of his biggest regrets was cutting him from the Giants because he thought he had enough wide receivers. That was his reason. Had enough wide receivers so that he cut Ed McCaffrey, and he regretted doing that. But anyone who watched Ed McCaffrey play football could attest to his durability and toughness. And that Monday night that we talked about earlier, that Monday night game, when he was hit so hard in the leg by that safety that just snapped both of his bones in his lower leg. And I'm watching him fall to the turf with his leg flopping, but still holding on to the ball, right? He didn't drop the ball. He made the catch. Even though he broke his leg, he made the catch, fell to the ground. That was evidence of his extreme toughness. But his draft profiles coming out of college said he was too weak and too frail to make it in the NFL. Now, can you imagine calling Ed McCaffrey too weak and too frail? It's unthinkable. And we all know that wasn't true. He was strong, and he was fast enough and tough enough to make it in the NFL. And that's your Mile High Legend. Thank you for joining, and have a great day, Broncos fans.